is why the Christian concept of God, and hopefully I can narrow this out in about 2 minutes, actually limits God. First of all, you can't say that God is one when he's in a trinity, okay? Because we don't say God is one in terms of being the number one like a 0 can come before it and a 2 can come after it. We say he is absolutely unified, absolutely one, not in a numerical sense. But as soon as you say that God has 3 personalities, as in 2 comes before 3 and 4 comes after, that's a numerical limitation. Okay, you're talking about the real number system. We're not even talking about complex numbers. Okay, it applies a limitation to God. All right. If you want to say that God's eternal, you can't say that he changed. You can't say that he became man. Okay. First of all, something that's eternal cannot change. Remember, I said that puts everything in a frame of reference before he came man and after he became man. And secondly, that change implies that God was imperfect before he became Jesus, before he assumed flesh in Jesus. All right? So you have a God that's not one, you have a God that's not eternal, you have a God that's imperfect. All right? Let's go to the sacrifice and demonstrate how this does exactly the same thing. If you want to say that God did a sacrifice for you, well then you have to say that that's a perfect sacrifice, because every action that God does is complete and utterly fulfilled, correct? And of the Christians here, who would say that Jesus' sacrifice guarantees your entry into heaven? Let's have a hand up to see. Okay. You are forcing God to do something. Can you force God to do something? Of course not. So me, if I wanted to become a Christian, I accepted this belief. Now I'm going to stand before God and say, you know what, you made a sacrifice for me, let me into heaven. Goodness me, our God cannot be forced. And in fact, our scholars have said that if God were to put all the righteous people into hell and put all the evil people into heaven, we would not have a right to question him, because he can be compelled to do nothing. So you have a God that's compelled. Now, if you want to say, hang on, Abdullah, you're taking this a little bit too far. We don't mean that we can force him to let us into heaven. Well, then you've got to say that the sacrifice is imperfect, and therefore God's done an action that's imperfect. So ultimately you end up with a God that's not one, a God that's not eternal, a God that is not perfect, and a God that isn't quite sure about what he's doing and what he's not doing. I hope I haven't offended anyone by saying that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for coming this evening. It's great that you can come, and I guess what I want to encourage everyone to do here is to read all the prophets. I don't just want you to say, I believe the prophets, but I'd never read them. I believe the book of Moses, but I'll never read it. If you say you believe the prophets, you should read them. We mustn't be hypocritical and think that that's okay. We mustn't deceive ourselves into thinking that that is okay. And so I want to encourage you, we've got Bibles up the back there. If you want to read the Law of Moses, if you want to read the Wisdom of Solomon, if you want to read the Gospels, we want you to read all the prophets. That's what we do as Christians. We read all of the prophets, and that's what we believe. Our belief comes from all of the prophets, not just one, and one prophet telling us how to interpret the rest. We don't go editing all the other prophets to make them fit our prophet. We just read the prophets. The idea that the Trinity is illogical or incomprehensible or just a confusion is actually not the case, because God is more complex than us. God's more complex than you. I think one of the great problems people have is they like to make God in their own image. They like to think, well, I would do this, and that we sort of make God the way we would like him to be rather than how he actually is. We need to listen to what God has said about himself. And in the Trinity, we see that God is more complex than us, that God is relational, and that God is self-sufficient. Because God is a personal God. But his personal attributes just didn't start when he created, as happens under Islam. No, God's personal attributes have existed from all eternity because God relates within himself. Under Islam, God is not self-sufficient because he relies upon creation for any expression of his personal attributes. Abdullah spoke about God being imperfect. This implies an imperfect God. Well, it's not imperfect. The God of Islam had a stage where was the singularity relating to no one, and then when he created, his personal attributes came into being. But in Christianity, God is unchanging. His personal attributes have always existed from all eternity. You're not forcing God if you ask him, if you receive the forgiveness of sins that he has done. If God has done something for you, it's not compelling him, it's not forcing him, it's just being thankful and saying, thank you, God, for what you've done. We're not asking you to compel God. We're just asking you to thank him and to say, I thank you, God, for what you've done. And I want to take hold of it because I know that by myself, I cannot save myself, that by myself I fail. I know that I need forgiveness of sins. And Father, God, I just pray and I thank you for sending Jesus, who's died on the cross to pay for the sins, and I just want to take hold of that. Thank you very much.